and what we're seeing from the global tourism industry and how COVID-19 is impacting our sector. We all know that it has been an unprecedented shock that we're all facing, but how much does that mean in terms of the overall flows globally? So just a few numbers as we go through the context that we're facing at this moment. We're facing a situation of almost 100% of destinations worldwide have implemented some kind of travel restrictions. Apart from the measures and the lockdowns at national level who actually are limiting flows at domestic market, we have literally the world with their borders closed. Besides this, if we look a little bit further, we also know through a monitoring that UNWTO does on a weekly basis that around 25% of destinations actually have such measures in place for the next 2 months. And 40% have those measures in place for 3 months. So we're looking towards an opening of restrictions that will probably be very gradual and very diverse around the world. What has that meant for our sector? The data that UNWTO has just released for the first months of this year shows obviously the huge impact that the lockdown has had on demand since March. Asia Pacific, as you can see, was one of the most affected regions already in February, and Europe having the big hit in March. Since mid-March, we saw most of the countries imposing travel restrictions and lockdowns. Other regions were also affected, and we'll probably see a much wider impact as we move to April, where probably 90% of the world has been closed. If we look forward, the challenge is always, obviously at this point, we don't have a crystal ball. It's impossible to say where we're heading. UNWTO has modeled some scenarios based on possible dates of opening up. And we do see that independently, if we start seeing opening of borders and lifting of travel restrictions in July, either in September or not so much until the end of the year, we're still facing a scenario that probably would impact at least in 60% of all international tourism flows. This is not comparable to any crisis that we've seen in the past. And although we see some good news, some countries already opening their borders. Italy is already announced that from the 3rd of June, borders will reopen. But again, we will face the issues of consumer confidence. We will face issues of discretionary spending in view of the economic crisis. So there is a high degree of uncertainty of how demand will recover. What would that mean for our sector? We might be facing a situation where between 50 million and 1.1 billion international tourists will not travel this year. This is a huge impact, obviously, a demand shock that we never saw before. And we do risk having 100 to 120 million people who are directly employed in tourism facing a risk of losing their job. So with all the negative part, we're here to look to what we can do together to actually navigate through this crisis, build back better, but also take the opportunity to accelerate some of the changes that we've seen. And I'm sure that we're going to talk about it with Mariette and Paul moving forward. We also need to be aware that recovery times will be very different among different markets. And they can vary as much as in the past. We've seen that from the SARS crisis, for example, the recovery of Asia took 14 months since the outbreak. In the Americas, after September 11, it took 42 months to go back to pre-crisis levels. So as we move forward, when we plan our businesses and our destinations, it's important to know that this phase will not only be the issue of recovering in the immediate, but also planning for the future moving forward. There's obviously, apart from the threats that we all know in terms of economic environment, the uncertain developments of the pandemic, the extent of the lockdowns, and what does the new normal look like, there's important opportunities, and we do think that wine tourism is among them, because we are talking about a model that is very much of close by, that can cater for small groups, that is connected to open spaces, that is connected to the territory, to rural areas. And we do think there's a huge opportunity for destinations to actually build this recovery on the back of segments such as wine tourism. With that said, I'd just like to share with you some of the conclusions that actually came out of the latest UNWTO seminar that we had on wine tourism, which was held in Chile. And we do hope that all of us can get there again very soon. Those are some of the conclusions which I think they were not only valid a few months ago when we were in Chile in December last year, but they continue to be even more valid today. So the first one is how important it is to know your customers better. Investing in technology to know them better, to connect with them, to have the information that allow you to target them. The second one is the importance of engaging communities in the value chain, and often the development of wine tourism product is obviously structured around wineries, but it misses to widen the offer and bring that value of the community towards the supply side. The third one is the importance of having solid governance models at the destination. And when we face a crisis, this becomes even more important, because if we don't work together throughout the value chain, for example, now, if we need to implement protocols to deal with health and sanitation, they need to be implemented in all the steps of the value chain, in all the steps of the traveler's journey. The fourth point which came out was go digital and mobile. So in marketing, in sales, in customer relation, and again, this is more important now than ever. The fifth point that came out is the importance of the destination. People travel to a destination, they might be motivated through, because they're very connected to a specific wine product, but what they will experience is a destination in its whole. So it is important to approach wine tourism from that perspective. And the sixth one is you need to engage visitors. They need to be part of the experience. I think we know that they're not there to become wine experts in visiting the wine cellars. They really want to experience more than just be told what is wine and how it is done. They need to be part of that experience. And the last one which came out, which I think is very interesting and more relevant now than ever, is the need to leave your essence, whatever you are, if you're a small destination, a big destination, small winery, more family producer. And this is something that came out very strongly in the conclusions of the conference. So I wanted to leave you with that as we move forward to discuss how can we survive this moment and how can we actually be stronger when we come out of it. With that said, I'm gonna invite Mariette to take the floor. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you're more than welcome to share your questions, your comments with the chat, and I'll be passing them to the panelists as we move along the session. Mariette, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sandra. It's great to be with you all. And I think one of the wonderful things about technology is that it connects us. And in this really troubling time and difficult time, we are able to have conversations as a global community, trying to find solutions that will carry us forward and not just help us survive this pandemic as businesses, but come through and thrive in the new future. And we know that people will travel again, but they will travel very differently. And we also know that people don't necessarily travel just because of wine tourism. It's one of the things that they find really enjoyable about destinations, and they're realizing more and more that wine is being produced in beautiful places around the world. And these places are places not just serving good wine, but they have wonderful people, there's wonderful experiences. So it's a microcosm of wine tourism that we're sharing with the world. And I want to just take you through a couple of slides and some thoughts. Essentially, we know that the industry globally is suffering unimaginable loss, and wine tourism, which is the lifeblood for many, has come to a grinding halt, and no wine producer or business within this value chain will escape this unscathed. We are all touched, and I think this is the one thing that is so unique about this crisis, is that we are all in this together. Our experiences are a little bit different. Here in South Africa, we have been through a very strict lockdown. We are not allowed to sell or buy alcohol at all. We exercise for a few hours in the morning only. So our wine industry has been deeply affected by the crisis. Around the world, we're seeing things like online sales escalating. We've not had that privilege here in South Africa, but yet we are able to use this time now to get ourselves ready and organized to be able to trade in a very new world. And also the loss and the anticipated cost of future fitting our businesses to comply with new health and safety regulations will come with additional costs. And all of this will lead to lots of people losing their jobs and potentially businesses not being able to survive or being at risk. So how do we move forward? I mean, we all know that this is a crisis. How do we take the next step? COVID-19 is the great equalizer like never before. Whether you're a third world or a first world country, we are in the same boat and we are touched by this. And as businesses, we need to be very shrewd right now. Now is not the time to be silent. Now is the time to make sure that we reach out to our existing customers and we build our relationships. And also we spend time in putting in place the things that we've perhaps neglected to put in place over the past few years. We know that this is a human pandemic. It's a human crisis. It has brought the world together, united to fight it and to survive it. And like never before, it's important for brands, also in wine tourism, to get real and to show a human side to your brand. We've been very good at being very professional, very sleek, and particularly in the category of wine, which is still quite intimidating for many people. Often our local audiences find it the most intimidating. And the message should be that not only wine experts need to speak about wine and its great offering and the wine tourism offering that comes with us. How are we letting ordinary people tell their stories, their wine stories, their wine tourism stories? And we know that we all crave very similar things. We crave the opportunity to reconnect with the places that we miss, the people we miss, to enjoy the food and the wine from certain destinations that we won't be able to get to. Certainly in South Africa, we just crave wine because many of us have run out of wine over the last 8-9 weeks that we've been in lockdown. So it's an equalizer, but it's also an opportunity. And here in South Africa, I want to just spend a minute or two to talk about our domestic market, our local market. We know that globally, local and domestic tourism will recover first before international travel. And we've been over-reliant on international tourism and international exports of our wine. We have a very small domestic market in terms of wine consumption, but also in terms of tourism. And to a large extent, we've neglected our own market. So here we have an opportunity to really make sure we focus our energy, because we have no choice. Our borders are closed. Up until recently, it was also closed for wine exports. We have an opportunity here to reach out to locals and to the domestic market, to build a market and to build a relationship. And that building of a relation comes from quite a vulnerable place and a truthful place. And we need to have communication and discussions with our local market to find out how do we repackage our wine tourism offering to be more appealing also to our own market. And over the last few days, we've hosted a Future of Wine Tourism webinar, and we've been looking very specifically at market developments and the principle of trust. Trust has always been an important commodity when it comes to making a buying decision or a traveling decision, but now it's more important than ever before. We will trust only our peers and people that we relate to. We need visual evidence now of how a place looks like and whether they are able to accommodate us safely, whether we are able to practice social distancing. And our local market and the people often within an hour or 2 hours around our business are very important for us. They have been loyal to us, certainly from a wine tourism perspective, and visiting our wineries for a long time. How are we using them to help us regain market share, to help us share our message that we will be open soon and that how our offering will change? So one of the big opportunities for us is to really start looking at how this vast ecosystem that wine tourism supports can become more sustainable. There are so many small businesses and people within the communities around the wineries and the restaurants that we visit. So there's so much more to wine tourism than good wine. And of course, as I always say, you need to be able to make good wine to have a wine tourism offering. But still, the beauty of each destination's wine tourism offering lies in its people. The people of a place is the warm blood and the flesh and blood of a place. And it's what gives us our sense of authenticity. And as we all climb on board this virtual and online marketplace, we need to remember that there's an ecosystem. And there is a diversity of voice that we need to bring through. How are we letting our chefs and our staff and our members from the community help share our story? And it's not necessarily a perfect story. It's a place of vulnerability and uncertainty about the future. But as entrepreneurs and small businesses and tourism people, we've always operated in an uncertain world, haven't we? We've never had the privilege of being able to map out the future perfectly or know exactly how things will pan out. We've dealt with many challenges in the past. Certainly this one is of much huger impact than many of the other things that we've had to deal with. But this we need to overcome collectively. And collaboration is the only way forward. And it's not just collaboration between destinations, whether that be in the Southern Hemisphere, the Northern Hemisphere, or across the world, but it's collaboration locally as well. As an industry, we're still very siloed. We work often in isolation. Tour operators don't have necessarily a strong relationship with the wineries they visit, or wineries don't really know even who is visiting them. Restaurants, I believe, is completely underutilized in the whole wine tourism experience and wine appreciation. Often it's just about pouring a glass of wine that you're enjoying with the meal. But what is the story behind that wine? Where is it grown? Where is it made? Who were the people that made it? So we have an opportunity here, not just to collaborate globally, but to collaborate locally and to start locally and to build a network that is quite a powerful and a different kind of network that can eventually translate into how we repackage wine tourism. And we have no reason right now not to work closer together as guest houses, as hotels, as service providers in the tourism and the wine industry, and as wineries and as a community. And we need to take hands with each other and figure it out and really look at how we are positioning ourselves to the world going forward. And we know the future is online. We've known it for a long time. We've had technology and smartphones for many years already. And yet as an industry, we've been quite slow to really fully integrate and utilize the online and digital world. For often it's still seen as a project and a little tick box that we give to someone to deal with, but it's not really integrated into every aspect of our business. And someone this morning, Paul Mabray, said this morning that when I asked him, is it too late? You know, can businesses still fully embrace digital now within this period? And he said, absolutely, of course, it's never too late. But there is something called digital debt. And if you don't keep up with how things are changing, and things are changing rapidly, it can be a little bit like not paying your credit card bills. And at some point in time, you're going to get to the point where you're unable to pay it off, and you're unable to catch up with your competitors who's moving ahead very fast. And right now we have an opportunity to touch people. We are all at home, most of us, but we are connected. We're connecting via screens, and hopefully very soon we'll be connecting and reconnecting in real life. So how are we touching people at home, and not just all copying what everybody else is doing online? How are we keeping it real? How are we sharing our very unique story? Because the only thing we have as brands, as destinations, is our story. It's the only thing that makes us unique. There are many beautiful wineries in the world. There are many great cellars, good wine and good winemakers. But how are we making it real? The only way is by telling our story authentically, warts and all, and sharing it from a place of vulnerability right now. We are all a little bit panicked and uncertain, but we are all hopeful about the future. And ultimately, our goal is to move from touching people at home and inspiring them at home to instilling in them a desire to visit us, a desire to experience what we have to offer at source, and not just to come and taste our wine, because wine tourism is far greater than just drinking good wine. A desire to come and meet our people, to break bread and to share moments, the moments that we have missed so much. So the question is, can anything good come from this? I think any good crisis comes with opportunity. And there are opportunities, and we have to try and fix our eyes on what those opportunities are right now and move beyond the sense of panic. Myself as well, in the first few weeks of lockdown, I was overcome with panic. Will my business survive? What will become of all the people? You know, in South Africa, we have a very poor economic state. We have lots of people already vulnerable, health-wise and financially. And my heart was breaking, particularly for small business who had no idea how they would navigate this. And still today, there's panic. But we have to hold on to hope, because if we are sitting in a place of panic, we can't create. And if we can't innovate, we can't survive. And now is the time to share our skills and our ideas and to work together as an industry so that we are able to come through this. It's a chance to rebuild. And also it's a time to invest in the kind of tourism that's a good tourism, the kind of tourism that our world needs going forward. More and more travelers are conscious about the impact that we have on our fragile world. And nothing has highlighted that more than this pandemic, just how fragile our world is. And we will travel, and many of us will be more conscious when we travel. So how can we as a wine tourism community put together the kind of wine tourism experiences that are good, not just for the earth and for visitors, but also good for host communities? And that really should be our focus. And places like South Africa, biodiversity and sustainability is a core principle and a very important part of our offering. But still, there's a lot of more that we can do. And I certainly am excited about seeing us come through this, not just more resilient, but also ultimately more sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariette, for particularly leaving us with that positive note. I think many of us were exactly in the same moment you mentioned when in mid-March we started a situation emerging of panic of what am I going to do? I'm going to be closed. I don't know how long am I going to be closed? When will I be able to open and how? So I think those are probably the first immediate reactions. And now we're seeing that Obviously, there is a moment to take advantage and prepare for what might come. And I think the digital transformation and the training of staff, whenever that's possible, will definitely make a difference in coming back stronger. With that said, I'd like to invite Paul Wagner to share his thoughts. And as I mentioned as well in the beginning of the webinar, we're very happy to get your questions and comments through the question and answer area, please. And we'll be addressing them after Paul's intervention. The virtual floor is yours, Paul.
Thanks, Sandra, and we're running a bit behind schedule, so I will try to move forward relatively quickly. Tihana is going to change the slides for me, so Tihana, let's go to the next one. Yeah, I think you probably know that in Napa, we have a long tradition of recovering from crises. In the last 25 years, 3 floods, fires, earthquakes, and we have developed a pretty set program. I don't want to say it's been easy. I don't want to say it's habitual, but we do know what it takes to recover. There are a couple of big differences here, and I do want to talk about how this is different from the crises that we have recovered. But first, let's talk about what Napa did to recover. Tiana? First of all, from all of these disasters, it has taken us somewhere between 3 months and 9 months to get back to our normal level of activity. So we know we can come back. We know it will take time. And the one thing I really want to underscore, and this is something Marietta touched on as well, you have to do this together. You have to do this as a group. It's not something that any individual group or any individual company can do. Next. And so, very simple, crisis communication. First of all, determine that the crisis is over. Now that it's over, develop that communications plan to tell the world. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here and say, you really should be developing your communication plan for when this is over. You should be doing it now, because when it is over, then you have to execute on a massive scale. And again, I will give you some examples on the next slide, Tiana, of how we have done some of that. First of all, you need to look at your resources. Whoops, go back one, would you please? There we go. You need to take advantage of your resources. I'm going to argue that your databases are your lifeline. I talked to a producer in Lodi, not nearly as famous as Napa as a wine tourism destination. He told me his wine sales over the last month were higher than the wine sales at his winery a year ago. And when I asked him why, he said, because at the beginning of this crisis, we reached out to everybody we could possibly think of. We made them very generous offers. We didn't discount our products. We offered free shipping, but we absolutely engaged with everyone we had ever talked to in the history of our company, and they talked back. People do have a need to communicate these days. They want to feel appreciated. Those databases are absolutely critical for your success. So reach out now, maintain contact. If you're lucky, you can sell products. If not, you can make reservations for the future, and also reconnect for when this is over. Now we go to the next one, Tiana. So in Napa, after one of the big floods, we used church bells, and we assembled 6 different religious leaders, from a Buddhist priest to an Orthodox priest to a Catholic priest to a New Age religious leader, and they all blessed the valley and celebrated the fact that we were open again. The reason this was successful was because, first of all, it's news. Again, tourism industry rarely has news. This was news. It was a good visual. There were things for people to see, and we had 7 television cameras there recording all of this for us. After the big fires, we took out full-page ads in newspapers throughout California. And again, this is important. We focused on the local tourist first before we focused on the international tourist. We took out full-page ads to just tell them we're open. The restaurants are cooking the food. The tasting rooms are pouring the wine. The only part that's missing is you. And in terms of reopening after the earthquake, we had wineries that had been closed because of the earthquake hold huge celebrations and invite everyone. Again, point being, big net, lots of distribution, reach out in a big way to communicate all of this, that you're back. Now, here is how COVID-19 is different, because we don't know when this is over. All of those plans we did in Napa were based on one simple concept. When it's over, we got to tell people. The problem is it's not always over. First of all, there is pre-vaccine over. We're seeing this now. In Napa County, as of today, our restaurants are allowed to open with specific restrictions and regulations in line. So that's the first step. But there are still all of these procedures and problems with pre-vaccine. And then there is post-vaccine, which hopefully will come relatively soon, in which case we have fewer of these restrictions and we can travel more freely. So let's talk about what it means when it's over. Tiana? Yeah, this is one of my favorite quotes from Yogi Berra, the baseball player. It ain't over till it's over. Okay, next slide. Over doesn't mean that we can be safe, because people don't go on vacation to be safe. And it doesn't mean functional. We're offering certain elements. People don't go on vacation for functional. What they need is wonderful. And when we communicate what we're doing, we need to talk about how wonderful the experience is going to be, not just that it's safe, not just that we've solved the problem, but that we really have something magical to offer. And when we can do that, then we really can't argue that, at least in one way and in somehow pre-vaccine, we're ready to be open for business a little more. Next slide. So what are some of the companies doing? You know that air travel will be restricted. Locals ultimately become your best ambassadors. So for example, 2 regions in California that are reacting to this. Napa is internationally famous and has an international customer base. They, I'm going to suggest, have been harder hit by this than Lodi, which is near Sacramento, not nearly as internationally famous, but 90% of the tourists in Lodi are locals to begin with. They are in a much better position to recover now. And there's an old saying in Napa that the high season is when you make your money. In the low season, the locals keep your doors open. So you absolutely, going back to what Marietta said, you absolutely need to build your neighbor business. You need them to become ambassadors. You need them to tell their friends, when you come visit us, there are things to do here. It's all part of investing in the post-vaccine over, is in this pre-vaccine over. You need to talk to your local customers and build that business. Next. Yes, Tiana, I think there's another slide coming, please. There we are. So are you open for business? Do you have what you need? This gentleman is Steve Mathiasen. His winery was absolutely focused on selling a lot of wine to restaurants. And of course, his business dried up completely. He offered a unique service for people buying his wines. He agreed that if you would buy 6 bottles or 12 bottles of wine, either he or his wife would join you and a group of friends in a video chat and lead you on a tasting of his wines. Very personal service, very authentic, real, as Marietta was saying. If you have people who can do this, if you're ready to put on a show, don't wait for this to be over. You can offer this right now via your electronic media. Next. And again, everybody needs to be in on this. Marietta said, you know, it's important to work with restaurants. When we think of Napa as a destination, we don't think of wineries. We think of everything as a group, and everybody needs to be on the same page. The region needs to sing like a choir, and that means hotel concierges, restaurants, winemakers. Everybody needs to know the message. They need to understand the message. They need to support the message, and they need to deliver it every time they're given an opportunity. And the time to develop that plan is not 4 months from now. The time to develop that plan is right now. You need to be able to tell me in the next 10 days, what's your major communication message? How are you going to deliver it? And how are you going to make sure everybody in your region knows this? If you have that done, you will recover more quickly than other regions. Next. So post-vaccine, then you can go global. And again, I'm going to reiterate some of what Marietta said here, which is capture what makes you unique. If I were a tourist destination right now, I would be Instagramming my pants off, sending images of how beautiful all this is. I spoke yesterday with a top executive at Expedia. He told me about one office that sells a lot of wine tourist cruises. And they explained that they had canceled $2.5 million worth of cruises in a month, but they had written over $1 million of cruises for the coming year because people are already making plans for next year. You need to make sure they know about you. They know that you're going to be open. They know that you're going to welcome them. These are people, particularly the cruise industry, older people such as myself, they can't wait for 10 years from now to make these trips. They want to travel. They've been cooped up. Their travel dreams for this year's have been altered, changed, or destroyed, and they're already making plans for next year. And you need to, right now, let them know exactly how wonderful your destination is and exactly how warm the welcome will be when they arrive. And I think that wraps me up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for taking us through the steps now and looking forward. I particularly would stress the point that you made of keeping in touch and keeping the dream alive. I think that's a very important point, both for wineries and for the destinations. To keep them alive in the minds of consumers is essential, so that when either post-vaccine or not, that's a big discussion, you can actually travel internationally again, then that will be top of your mind. Thank you very much both. Thank you, Paul and Mariette. I'll bring some of the questions that have been shared with us. And I think one is very, very to the point, and I'd like to start with that. And it says, and I'll address it both to Paul and Mariette, which are the mistakes that should not be done when this is over? The don'ts. Paul, do you want to?
Well, shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Who do you want to start?
Go ahead, Paul.
Again, I think the first thing is to avoid telling people about the problems they're going to experience. I think the communication needs to be the wonderful experience they are going to have. When the big fires hit Napa and Sonoma last year, for example, some of the wineries were reluctant to talk about the fires at all. And we said, no, you have to talk about the fires, but you have to tell them we've solved the problem. The fires are over and we can move forward. So be open, be human, but also share, not just, yes, we are aware. To pretend nothing has happened is crazy, but to say we're aware of the situation, but we are embracing the future, and we've got some really wonderful things for you to experience moving forward.
And I think to add to that, we, as I said before, we're in this together. So how we are feeling is how a lot of people are feeling out there. We are craving the ability to just go for a wonderful hike in nature. We want to reconnect with loved ones. So how are we creating stories online right now and visual inspiration, almost that to, speaking to people's senses and emotions and igniting in our audiences that desire to travel and showing them how you are able to also answer their fears and being able to offer them a product that is safe and enjoyable and gives them an opportunity to, in a fairly safe, spacious environment. The wonderful thing about many wine tourism destinations and wine tourism experiences is that it's often nature-based. There's a lot of nature around. We have some space, and we need to be very clever about how we use that space and how we potentially change our operations a little bit, so that people can see visually that they're able to go and stay somewhere, maybe in a self-catering cottage on a farm, or maybe as a small group of friends who have been in lockdown together. People will be afraid after this to travel, but they would want to travel. So how are we now giving them solutions? And then in terms of post-lockdown, we cannot fall into the trap of falling back into old habits. We have to use this as an opportunity to accelerate our growth in online and digitalization, accelerate our growth in direct to consumer sales, accelerate our efforts to be more sustainable, and not just hope for things to return to normal. So I think that is very, very important, is whatever we put in place now has not got to be with a short-term solution in mind, but with a longer-term solution. And the opportunity is that it's a leveler. Small businesses, big businesses are all affected. And now as a small business, you could put things in place that can help you accelerate your business.
And we've all got a story already to tell about Mariette, because she ran out of wine. And I think that's a great argument to tell all of our customers, you need to buy a lot of wine now. You always need at least 2 months supply of wine in your house, because you never know when this could happen again.
Exactly. Forget the toilet paper. I know people were stuck with toilet paper before this, and in South Africa, we didn't realize that there will be such a big ban on alcohol sales. So I think people did not buy enough wine, and now they don't have wine to drink at home anymore.
There goes a lesson from the crisis for the next one. Make sure you stock your wine. Very good. Thank you very much, Paul and Mariette. I think there's a very important point there, which is the issue of technology, and a question that just came up is, what do you think about virtual reality in wine tourism business, now that we talk so much about digitalization and enhancing experiences at a distance?
Yeah, I have seen some very clever virtual reality programs from various regions, one of them from Catalonia that I really enjoyed. I'm going to take a slightly minority view here, and I know Paul Maybury quite well. He's a good friend, and is actually contributing some of the material on a book I'm writing. But the technology, I'm going to suggest the technology is not the key. The key is how you use the technology. And the most important thing you can do, rather than doing spectacular technological effects, is to create a human connection. And if you need virtual reality to do that, fair enough. But I think it is equally possible to sit down with a revered and wonderful, warm, authentic winemaker and have a simple conversation with him on YouTube instead of virtual reality, and communicate the same things. So it's not so much which specific, are you going to be in the movies, on television, on radio? Those are all different options. The real question is, who's going to direct the show, who's going to star in the show, and who is going to make this a touching human moment rather than just lots of glitz and fun, and frankly could be any region in the world.
Correct. And that's gold right there. And we get so fixated on the tools and the platforms that very quickly we lose our sense of personality and authenticity, and we become same as everybody else. And what we are dealing with now in the world is an information overload. Everyone's doing webinars, everyone's doing live tastings and virtual wine events, etc. And I've seen a few of them, and a lot of them are quite drab and boring, you know. So it's really, really important to make wine, to just demystify it a little bit. We have an opportunity here to make wine fun again and real. And it comes back to what Paul's saying, is to put the human back into it. And essentially wine is a connector, and we get very philosophical and very into, and we scare off our market. And we need to invite voices in to the conversation that are ordinary people that drink wine because they love it, not because it is of a certain terroir or it pairs well with that. You know, we need to mix things up a little bit, have a little bit of fun. And the platforms that we use are enablers. They're enabling us to reach a far greater audience now. And of course, people want to start seeing visual evidence, as I said, of what that experiences of a greater community is that they can look forward to. Perhaps they don't have your wine available for sale, but they might want to visit your destination and fall in love with your wine. So it's not always about just getting that wine sale through. It's also about telling a story, planting a seed, inspiring people to visit Chile, to visit Spain, to visit South Africa, not because it makes excellent wine only, but because it has a really interesting story to tell.
Thank you both. And I think at the end of the day, as you said, it is a complement. There's interesting experiences of using virtual reality at the terroir and also at the winery, where, for example, you can learn more about the process, but it needs to be embedded into that experience. I think in the times that we face as well, as Paul was saying, you know, it's much more interesting if you're able to chat with the person that's making the wine or that can tell you that story, then probably, as you say, have a tour that at some point might look all the same as you would have 3 or 4 destinations. And I think also
Sandra, if I can just jump in there before we move on. Someone said something very lovely and practical in the webinar earlier today that we were hosting, is that, and Paul just said, there's few things as wonderful as to sit down with the winemaker and hear them talk about their wine and the process of making it and taking you through their cellar and in the vineyards. And it's unrealistic to expect winemakers to be able to personally see all of us in the flesh. But now we can bring the winemaker into our homes, and the chefs and the people behind the scenes working in the restaurants. And so we have an opportunity, and that's what technology does. Technology helps us to reach more people and to get into people's homes.
Yeah. And I think to your point, it's also, you know, we've been seeing an explosion of cooking classes all through social media in the different sizes and shapes. And I think we often forget, we were discussing as well, that the pairing of wine with gastronomy, there's a huge road ahead to explore. And in these times where everyone's trying to learn to cook something, it's a good opportunity for a destination to say, you know, I'm teaching you my local dish, and this goes perfectly with this and this wine. And I think this is, again, to your point of bringing the dream of the person to that destination to learn how to cook it at home and later visit it. I think Paul wanted to add something.
I did just a little bit. Yes, thank you, Sandra, because when Maria, you know, when I said talking to a winemaker, one of the things we need to keep in mind is that, in fact, many winemakers are quite boring. And if it's better to bring on someone who grows grapes, what you want to give is an emotional and human connection. And it's not someone talking about malolactic fermentation that's going to achieve that goal. A lot of this is going to be, again, as I said before, you need a director and a producer for this movie. It's not enough to simply take a bunch of volunteers and hit the road. You need a vision of how this is going to go, and you need the best actors your region can put together as the cast of this movie you are creating, whether it's a movie, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's Instagram, whatever the communication method is, you need to have a director, a producer, and a creative vision and great actors to make it.
Exactly.
Thank you, Paul. I'll move now to one of the challenges that many people are mentioning, and Mariette mentioned in the beginning, which is when you don't have a strong domestic market or proximity market. A lot of people are talking about that your market will be the one that can travel within 150 kilometers. What if either as a winery, your business is totally oriented to wine tourism for bigger volumes of people coming from the international market, or as a destination? And we all know that coming back to pre-levels will take, depending on the destinations, its time. What is your vision on growing that domestic market that probably was not enough catered for before?
Yeah, I think this is a crucial element. I mean, the evidence is there that our local market will recover first. That's no debate. And we have an opportunity here. And it's not just about trying to fill a gap that is lost because we've lost some of our international market. This is a future strategy that we can accelerate. And it's something that we should have done from the onset. And we are seeing some interesting discussions here locally on social media in South Africa, where there's a little bit of a kickback from locals saying, hang on, now we are good enough, but for a long time, we were not great or we were not seen as the ideal visitor. You were just pandering to the international tourists, and now you want us. So others again are saying, yay, we can't afford to travel overseas because of our currency and our borders are closed, and we are so excited to explore our own country. So you have very different perspectives, and you have to first and foremost get really honest and real and a little bit vulnerable, and share with people the fact that you are in this situation, but that you have the desire to change your offering to become more suitable for what local people want. So have the conversations, reach out. We certainly in the Western Cape have a situation where a huge percentage of our cellar door visits is from local people within a radius of an hour. Now, those are people that have taken a lot of effort to visit your farm in the past. But you know what? We've taken them for granted often. We've not really reached out and, really built that loyal following. So we have a database often that we're not using or exploiting enough, and we need to have real conversations, build those relationships. And if it means adding a different offering by working with some of the other businesses in your area, it's very important now to create that network so that you can establish new experiences. If you're not currently offering something for the local market, work with businesses in the area that are, and create an experience. That's the only way forward.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this gets back really to the basics of marketing. And the basics of marketing is, if you're going to market something, the first thing you need to do is understand that market. It is quite clear, because of the limitations on international travel, it's not just an opportunity, as Mariette says, it's a necessity. And as a necessity, you need to decide right now, we need to market to our local community, which means the first thing you do when you start a new market is you go out and listen. You don't go out and talk, you go out and listen. You talk to them about what they want, what they would like, what they think of you now, and then you start thinking about how you'd like to change that perception. But the first rule is go out, learn that market, understand what they want, and start putting together programs that they would find attractive. And Mariette's right, that may not be the same program that appeals to an international visitor, but shame on you for not having done it beforehand. And now you have no choice. If you're going to succeed over the next 6 months, you're going to do it based on local traffic, or you're not going to do it. So listen to that market, understand what they want, and offer things that they really are going to embrace. Once you do that, again, as we say in Napa, the international visitors, the high season, that's where you make your money. The low season, the locals are what keeps the doors open, and you need that business year round.
100%. Here in South Africa, if I can add, we have been working very hard over the last 2 years as Destinate. We have we started what we call the Joburg Wine Club, which specifically targeted at building our local market for wine, and we're using wine tourism as a key element in that as well. And in the conversation yesterday about the domestic and the local market, I had a dear friend of mine online talking about it. He's based in Johannesburg. He's a very well-known actor in South Africa. And he spoke about that human connection that we've been talking about today as well. And that potentially in building our local market, we need to look at the language we use, the cultural nuances, food and local cuisine and how we bring wine down to earth and get local people to share their experience, but also perhaps their lack of knowledge about wine. And in South Africa, we have 11 official languages. And wine is still primarily in South Africa sold in English. And as a result, it is quite impersonal for many people. They just don't relate. So the simple idea that was planted yesterday is to say, let's tell our wine story in the vernacular, in the language of ordinary people.
It works for the Catholic Church.
Let's cook ordinary food with exceptional wine. It doesn't always have to be fine dining. Let's ask the mother who's trying to juggle homeschooling, running a business, keeping a house together in lockdown, and what kind of wine would she love to drink now? And what will she be cooking tonight? We need to get real about.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing in Napa is a number of businesses, restaurants, wineries, etc., doing charitable works as a way to support the local community, build that relationship. One of our better restaurants offered a program where you could send the restaurant, make a donation to the restaurant, and the restaurant would cook meals for the health workers who were fighting the coronavirus. Very clever promotion. The meals were not expensive. The meals were good. They were deeply appreciated. And it built that relationship where the restaurant enhanced its image. It kept the kitchen open cooking. The medical workers got great food and everybody felt a little better about it. So there are ways that you can do this moving forward that, there's another question coming up. So I want to get back to Sandra to let her ask the next question.
Thank you, Paul. I think there's actually very many questions. We won't be able to answer them all, and we're very happy to see the interaction. But I think because we're in a moment of passing through the shock and starting the reopening in many of the destinations, one of the important questions that has come up is about health and safety protocols, both in Napa and in South Africa. Maybe you could share a little bit of what the wineries and the destinations are doing around being ready to receive tourists again.
Yeah, well, in Napa, we literally opened restaurants for business today. I have not read all of the regulations, and I'm delighted that I do not own a restaurant so that I don't have to read all the regulations. I do know that the staff will be wearing masks. I do know that there will be 2 meters between groups. I know that there are a whole series of elements that are being put in place. Interestingly enough, however, restaurants are approved to open in Napa, but wine tasting rooms are not. And that continues to be an issue. We're hoping that by early June that some of the wine tasting rooms will be able to open, but we're also looking at that as, are the protocols in the restaurants functioning well enough that we can then apply them to wine tasting rooms as well. Restaurants are considered perhaps more of a priority than wine tasting rooms. So we're trying these protocols in the restaurants. It will, at least until we have a vaccine and the fear of COVID-19 has disappeared, it will never go back to the way it was. And so we do need to, I talked to someone in Italy yesterday who said they were doing wine tasting, but people were sitting at individual tables with significant distance between the tables. So very much like a restaurant setting for the wine tasting rather than a tasting room bar. So different things, and I'm sure different health departments will have different guidelines.
Thank you, Marriott.
So from our side, we have a dedicated wine tourism unit at Vinpro working very hard on putting together protocols and regulations, working with counterparts around the world. So that will come. And I think, the regulations will be rolled out. I think very importantly as well is where our workforce fits into this. It's one thing being able to safeguard visitors. It's another thing completely inviting potential sick people, let's be honest, to come into our establishments. How are we protecting our staff? How are we equipping our communities? How are we putting regulations and methods in place to have strong trust relationships with our teams who we expect to serve our visitors and expect to welcome our visitors with open arms. So it's a very careful balance that we have to get right. We have to make sure that we are ready as businesses. We cannot just go and throw our doors open because we are desperate to survive financially. It will be a catastrophic situation if our team members get sick and we are back into lockdown. So being prepared, training our staff, making sure that our staff trust us to protect them, and being able to serve our visitors in an environment that is conducive to good health is also a very important factor for us to keep in mind. And ultimately, the total experience then will be enjoyable also for the visitor, because they will be received with great love and care by an empowered workforce who feels well looked after. So that is something that we need to invest a lot of energy in as well going forward.
Thank you, Mariette. I think that's a very important point. I think the issue of workers, and I'll reinforce again, I think the whole value chain of the traveler, wherever your responsibilities in that point needs to be looked at from the health and security point of view. And I think, again, this is about cooperation, because a destination that puts those regulations in place needs to support the private sector, needs to work with the private sector to implement them and to train their staff, which will be essential, but also to communicate to consumers. I think it will be critical as we move forward that those protocols are clearly communicated to consumers, that they know what has been implemented in the different establishments, so that they can bring again that trust in their travel. And one of the important points, because with us are obviously probably also tour operators and agencies working with wine tourism, is the cancellation policies. We're seeing a shift because obviously uncertainty is very big, and I think flexibility at this point is probably one of the key elements of that restart process as well, that we will need to see consumers feeling confident that they can book, knowing that if something happens, either they'll get their money back or they'll be able to shift their bookings into a deferred, probably late date. So I think if I would summarize, I think definitely being agile, technological, and empathic at this moment is probably one of the 3 key points that we all need to take forward. I will now close. We're a little bit running out of time, but I'd like to very much thank Paul and Mariette for joining us this afternoon here in Europe. Morning, late afternoon, evening in other parts of the world. We had with us people ranging from Kazakhstan to Italy, Chile, Argentina, China. So thank you, everyone. I'll just like to tell you that all the presentations and the recording of this webinar will be available online at the UNWTO website. And you're more than happy to also connect with us at any moment, and we'll be happy to share whatever we can to help everyone move forward. And I just got a note in the chat saying from Portugal as well, so I'll say boa tarde, and very good to have you all here. Muchas gracias, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye, Mariette. Bye, Paul. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, Sandra.